first met Stacey on a call just like this. We were doing a cohort with HEPZIBA 62.4 on trauma-informed care. And so I contacted Stacey just recently. And I mean, we know the mental health crisis in our country is large and it affects our children deeply. And I have a lot of questions from kids pastors as well about handling behaviors and what that looks like. And I thought Stacey would be such the perfect person to talk to us about this. So, Stacey, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we can't wait to learn from you.
Absolutely. And Stephanie, just remind me again how much time we have. What time am I supposed to end by? Because
You're
I'll get it
great.
down.
Yes, so we probably need to start moving back there around quarter till,
Quarter till. Perfect.
10
All right.
till, wherever we are. We'll figure it out.
No worries. All right. Sounds good. So let's do this. I would love to put into the chat, as you think about that title, thinking about mental health behaviors, things that maybe your team, your volunteers, what questions do you have? Because I'm the kind of presenter that I want people to walk away with what you came for. So if there's something that you would say, hey, I'd love to have some thoughts on this, or have you seen this, or how does your team handle this type of challenge or behavior? Or again, maybe it's not something you've dealt with, but you're thinking about. Let's go ahead and put that kind of stuff in the chat. Because again, I definitely want to make sure that we all walk away with some helpful tools and specific strategies that you can use. Um, and Stephanie, you did a great job with my bio. I appreciate that. I'm always like hiding when people start reading, and I'm just like, okay. But just to kind of give you this background, at Christ Wesleyan, I am the children's pastor there. I served as a children's pastor at Culture Life Wesleyan Church before coming to Christ Wesleyan. I tease people, even as a teenager, I was on the Sunday school bus, right? So like youth ministry and children's ministry has always been part of my journey in different capacities. But also in the mental health space for the last 20 years, I have been, I'm a licensed professional counselor by license. And so I've been in the space of presentations to schools, working with families. And so on Sunday morning, I kind of wear a lot of different hats, in between being a mom, a parent, a therapist, a children's pastor, all the things. But really, my heart is to help us to have a better understanding of where children are these days and then how we can best support them in Sunday mornings. I always tell my team, it really is important. um, yeah, and we don't have a buddy and their buddy didn't show. Absolutely. Yeah, that's something. And I love that we're doing things like buddying up our children. I'm going to be talking about that for social wellness. Again, the idea and those strategies and getting that through. So perfect. So I'm going to share my screen and my little child-friendly PowerPoint here. I always tease people. It's like I love Canva and all the great things. So I'm going to minimize us though for a little bit. And again, you can continue to put things in the chat. If there's something that I say that kind of resonates with you, you can put that in the chat. I'm just going to put my little alarm on because like I said, I can keep talking forever on this topic because I'm super passionate about helping our children. So one of the things that I really want to us to kind of think about as we are going through this presentation is just our differences in our children. And so children are different. I know people tell me that all the time. They're like, man, these children aren't like they were back in the day. And there's some truth to that, 100%. What we're seeing are neurodivergent numbers on the rise. And so back in the day when a classroom teacher may have had maybe one student who had an IEP or 504 plan, that classroom teacher now with 20 students in the room may have 7 or 8 of those students needing some type of learning plan, some type of behavior plan. Many of our children are, again, we're seeing the diagnoses on the rise. And so even our educated teachers, and I'm really focusing on that word for a second, they're struggling in classrooms, right, with the same behaviors. I was just doing a conference this weekend called Love Our Babies Well, and a special education teacher walked up to me and she was like, we are struggling, and this is our specialty, and yet we're still struggling with how to work with so many children with so many different needs. And so when you think about our volunteers, many of them are not in the education space. Many of them are not trained. They just have a heart and a passion and a love for our children. And so I say, we have to also recognize that and giving grace in the sense of like, they're not trained, and even trained teachers are struggling. And so we only have that hour and a half, but we also have that same student for that hour and a half that that classroom teacher has. And they are still showing up with the same struggles because we're asking them to do things like write or read scripture or sit at the circle time or, participate in worship that feels like their music class that they run out of when they're in the school setting, right? So again, we're going to see some of those same challenges because our students have those challenges in any environment. And one of the things we're going to have to learn to adapt. We've been talking about schools needing to adapt. What we're doing from an education perspective. Sunday school is an education learning environment. We are teaching them scripture. We are teaching them the word of God. We are teaching them connection, right, with each other. And so we're going to have to adapt as well in order for our parents to connect, but also for our children to connect. And so one of the things that helps me is viewing all behavior from the idea of what if, right? Viewing it as if all children, I always say to folks, if I see, let's say, a kiddo that's, running out of the Sunday school classroom, right, not wanting to stay, what if I viewed that child as having a sensory concern? How would I handle that child differently than a child that's just misbehaving, right? And I know, again, I'm speaking to people who care and love children, but also thinking about how do we train our volunteers? And part of this is recognizing that when we say a child has a disability, so something like ADHD, autism, anxiety, depression, learning disabilities, all of these disabilities are not just happening at school. We're going to see them right in Sunday school. So, our perspective of viewing behavior is also where I start with our volunteers. We have to change our lens. We're going to talk about trauma informed care in a little bit, but the idea of viewing this child as struggling. Let me give you an example. Students who have ADHD, for example, in a classroom setting, are treated differently with their disability than a student who's blind. If I have a blind student come into my Sunday school class, immediately, where does my mind go? Well, if this student can't read, I'm not saying, oh, they're misbehaving because of their disability. I'm saying, oh, it's because of their disability. I need to now change my, curriculum. I need to maybe have Braille. I need to have, you know, uh, devices that read to them. Like I need to change things in my environment based on the disability that I'm seeing. And so we will do the same for a student that's in a wheelchair, right? And we'll change our environment and we'll change things to accommodate. But how often do we do that when we have a student with an identified disability like autism, ADHD? And I know some of our churches have specialized classrooms, and that's great. Not all of our churches do. And so, thinking about like, we do not have at our church enough volunteers at this point to have a separated classroom. And so, we're doing all of our accommodations within that same Sunday school classroom. Um, and so, thinking about how do we even begin to um, Went to just sorry, I'm just gonna, yep, acting out, making sure. Yep, perfect. Yep, we're gonna talk about that. Awesome. I'm just making sure I'm keeping up with what's in the chat. Environmental wellness, for example. So some of the things that we do without addressing specifically an individual child, this helps us to level set the environment. Many of you are familiar with having things like sensory headphones and earplugs, and that's great. Having fidgets, that's supposed to be fidgets with a D, fidgets in the room. Um, but thinking about differentiated seating. So we have seats where they are stools. We have seats that are cushions. Differentiated seating allow children that need movement. We have this wonderful rug that feels like grass in one of our rooms. And so even the idea, if I have a student that wants to color or do their craft laying on the rug, I don't see that as misbehavior because not everybody has to sit at the table. As long as we're participating and we're doing the activity, great, you can do that on the rug, absolutely, is my answer, right? And so even the idea of creating environmental wellness. I have Lego stations. We have things like cars. I have one little one that needs to have the car in his hand as I'm doing the story lab lesson, right? So again, this isn't all the toys have to be put away and no kids can play with the toys. No, this little one needs that movement piece for him to be able to tune in. And when it's time for Q&A, guess what? He can answer every question because he's been listening, although he's sitting there playing with a car as we are doing the story time lesson. And so thinking about your environment and how does that help students with differences? Routine consistency. One of the things I always say to folks, autistic children, for example, have a hard time with change and transitions. And so if you think about it, even in my church, every Sunday there is a different person in that room, right? And so now we're having to get this young person used to someone different every Sunday. And if we're at least doing the same routine, although it's a different face and a different person, at least my young person can say, oh, but it's the same routine. And that helps increase compliance. And so I really stress with my volunteers that yes, you can be flexible in how you do things, but consistency and how we all present from, 10:50 to 12 o'clock, we all have to really have that same routine because it does increase the consistency for our young people. But for example, when we're in school settings, if there's a substitute, my autistic student would have a difficult time on the day that there's a substitute. And that's the same experience that we have with Sunday morning. And these are little things that we don't often think about. So one thing I try to do is be a greeter. For all of my students, when we do our dismissal time to our live wire kids time, I try to at least be a familiar present and greet them, even if I'm not the Sunday school teacher that day, just to kind of give that level of consistency. Social wellness, and I love that somebody had mentioned this idea of peers, right? And so pairing up, and when that peer is not there, so one thing I would suggest with that is having multiples, having multiple buddies, and then having what we call a plan, right? A plan for that. Um, when you get to knowing your students, again, I always say the first time something happens, you're like, oh, okay, now we know that Sarah does not like when we play the worship music too loud. But now that we have this information, now we can put plans in place. And so thinking about if we have a student, for example, who needs a buddy and their buddy's not here, do we have an alternate buddy? Do we have a backup plan? We should always have a plan in place. And that gives us even the idea of getting the youth and the family involved in planning to say, hey, bud, if your buddy's not here, who would be someone else that we can pair you with for this Sunday, right? And so thinking about even those kind of moments, having a backup plan. We don't know until it happens. So I say give yourself grace because you don't know it's going to be an issue sometimes until it actually happens, right? And so that's that part too. One of the things with social wellness, my autistic kiddos love, love, love participation. I have some that don't, but I have some that absolutely love it. My ADHD babies, I love them because their energy allows them to be the ones when I'm like, hey, who wants to hand out snack? Their first hands up, right? They're already out their seat. So giving them leadership opportunities, helping them to be, I always say, use the energy as part of your lesson, and helping them to engage and get in the space in a positive way. Giving choice and activity. One of the things we will start a craft and I will notice that my kiddos that kind of have that anxiety and need to finish the craft before moving on, I will say, no worries. You have a few more minutes to work on that. We're going to move though in 5 minutes to this. Let me know if you want to continue to work on that or if you want to join us over here. Again, part of that is recognizing that anxiety. That's not refusal. That's not them saying, I don't want to do it, but it really is them wanting to finish that well before moving on. And so even being able to recognize that Sometimes we have a room of 10 kids. And so, again, having enough adults in their space is also important to be able to give that flexibility, in which I talk about us being flexible. Because many of our neurodivergent children, so we talk about specifically autism, for example, part of the diagnosis, and I always tell people it is two things. Social deficits and having difficulty with social awareness and social exchanges, and the second piece that makes someone autistic is their inability to be flexible, right? So rigid routine. They need the same things the same way. How they view perspective, that black and white thinking. They cannot move like we move when it comes to even processing moments. And so when I'm just trying to think of an example. I have a young one, and again, when anything is different or changing, I will walk over and I will talk to him and I say, "Hey, listen, we're getting ready to do this a little bit different. How can I help you move through that?" And we have this relationship now where he understands, like, if something is different, Pastor Stacey's going to talk to me about it, right? Because I know it will take him a minute to be flexible, and to get through it. I deal with a lot of crying on Sunday morning. I'm just going to say that right now. From different kiddos in the sense of helping them move through things. And crying, again, isn't disruptive behavior in my perspective. It's communication, right? When these kiddos are having a hard time, usually the frustration will come out either in anger or tears, but that's where we have to be flexible, and helping them with the communication piece. Allowing movement, so physical wellness, and do note that I'm talking about wellness. That's a really big piece. What I believe in working with children and working with anyone actually is just the 8 dimensions of wellness. And so I kind of pulled out a couple that I really focus on Sunday morning, even how we structure our Sunday morning time. So, for example, with physical wellness, a lot of our neurodivergent kids need movement. And so saying sit at the table, well, that's really hard for them to sit for 20 minutes or an hour. And so we have things like I have minute to win it activities, which are like competitions and movements. And, they're putting a spoon in their mouth with the ball and they're walking across the room. Or we have one where they're taking streamer and they're wrapping each other around streamer and who can do that the fastest. And what I'm doing there is allowing in a good way movement and energy. Um, with worship, I'm very specific. We do like the worship songs that have the movements to them, that have motion. But again, we also are aware of how loud we play our worship music. I have some kiddos that can't sit near the speakers, that don't want to be near the screens, that have a hard time when we turn the lights off. And so all of these things we've learned in the process of who needs what when kind of a feeling. But that is also important, as well, to allow that movement piece. I cannot stress, I know we're all moving into the technology space. I'll just give you a quick synopsis on some research that we're looking at. Research is looking at the fact that because we're not coloring, because we're not handwriting, kids are having difficulty with memory, with learning, with focus. These were things that we did when we were young. If you had coloring books, right? Think about how you'd sit there for hours and just pick out your coloring and you'd sit calmly. Well, these are things that I've brought back into Sunday morning. We try not to use technology except for our story lab and our story time because of the curriculum that we use. But everything else is we have the Bible and we're physically flipping the pages and reading scripture together. We're creating and building, we're coloring. All of these things are also about bringing the energy down. Many of my neurodivergent kiddos love art. They are creative beings and babies. I always tease, I'm like, you give them a craft or an art project and they are on it. And so this helps us in the room to, again, bring down that energy, get calm and focused, and then snacks. I am a firm believer of somewhere within 15 to 20, 30 minutes, we are feeding babies because that hangry behavior starts to set in. Again, sometimes what we're seeing, I never make the assumption that babies have been fed before coming to church, or again, the fact that we're in church already about 40 minutes by the time they're coming into children's ministry. We want to go ahead and give them something to snack on to help, again, to manage any of those hangry kind of behaviors, and get ahead of those moments as well. The emotional wellness piece. And so, again, this is something that I talk specifically about to parents, to my team, thinking about saying their names in positive moments. Think about how many times your most difficult students on Sunday morning, how many times do you say their names and it's a negative moment, right? And so I want to flip that. And I'm really big on, I say everybody's name when they come in. We do kind of an introduction circle so that everybody else can learn each other's names. Um, and name tags are great for me. I always tease people, I need the name tags because I'll forget kiddos' names very quickly. But even the idea of really pointing out positive moments for them, and then giving praise every time that you see expectations being met. I am big on praising. I'll tell you a quick story. I took a couple of seasons of coaching soccer for 5 and 6 year olds, and excuse me, one of the parents came to me and they said, "You are the most kindest coach." She's like, "You're always out there thanking the kids, praising the kids." And I said, "Well, I want them to meet the expectations, right? So if they're, close to it, I'm going to continue to give them praise and that encouragement." But praise goes a really long way in helping them to meet expectations. In child development, we talk about this idea of scaffolding. So when you think about a building that's being built, and as the building is being built, we have scaffolding to kind of help keep it in place. That's what we want to do with our young people. So maybe they're not 100% getting through that activity, but we want to start building that praise as they're going through it to, again, help them to meet the expectations. I love the smiles and the high fives. I'm a big high five smiles, acknowledging those moments. And then we want to also acknowledge strong emotions. Like I said, there are Sunday mornings where I have criers. Listen, I've got a couple of babies that, break down. And I say babies, but they could be 7 or 8 years old and they're breaking down because someone else took the color pencil they wanted to use, or something didn't go the way they wanted when they were building their craft. And so getting through those moments is also about acknowledging them. I have one kiddo, it's great. His mom helps serve. And anytime it's time to go, like he doesn't want to leave. And so I have to have this heart to heart conversation and he's crying. And I'm like, all right, bud, I know it's time for us to go, but guess what? You're going to be back with me next week. And what are we going to do next week? And so even though he's crying, right? Like, and you can see him start to kind of settle. And you can see him kind of like, okay, I'm going to see you next week. And I'm like, yes, you are. It's going to be fine. But I'm not going to tell him, don't cry. I'm not going to, literally, I always say to folks, I'm trying to distract him from the emotions in that moment with a positive emotion and energy. And so really thinking about those harder moments. How can we distract? How can we redirect? I have one kiddo, because his impulsivity, he calls out a lot and he says a lot. And some of those things he says are pretty difficult on Sunday morning. And so again, from a positive perspective, I will redirect him, but I will also make sure that I'm making that a talking point for others. And again, so that he's feeling a part of the conversation and not that everything, I mean, he's not using foul language or anything like that, but some of the things he talks about, you're like, whoa, bud, this is Sunday school. So helping him to kind of redirect that in a positive way and getting ahead of those moments with him. One thing I really find really helpful when our kiddos are having a hard time is, how can I help you in the moment? Right. And again, acknowledging that strong emotion. Seems like this is really tough for you to be in here today. How can I help you? Right. And again, I'm the kind of person that will come down to their level. I don't speak, when I'm speaking to a child, I get down at their eye level, calm. I always tell people stand about 2 feet away, though, because an acting out child you don't want to be close to. That's how people get injured. So I always say give you a little bit of a distance there, but then also say, hey, listen, how can I help you right now? What do you need from me? Many of our neurodivergent children, when they are escalated and upset, it's going to be yelling, screaming, and there's going to be hard emotion. And I say to folks, we have to come in softer, not stronger. Stronger will give you more resistance in the moment from them. If you bring your tone down, you bring your energy down, what you're starting to do is help them to regulate. And that's really our goal in the moment, is to help them to regulate and to calm and to meet needs. And so oftentimes somewhere in the screaming and the upset, you can hear their difficulty. And I will say things like, oh, so what you're telling me is that that person took your markers and right now you really want to use the red marker. Am I hearing what you're saying? And again, that's where I'm acknowledging what they're saying, being able to hear them, and then asking them to say, how can I help? So let's see if we can find a red marker. Would you help me find the red marker? Right. And so again, being able to help them and walk them through the moment. When we think about, and if anything, again, I'm saying if you have questions about anything, please definitely put them in the chat. I'm going to make sure that we have time. I'm just looking at our time here, and end with enough time for us to talk a little bit. If there's any questions that you might have as well. Trauma-informed volunteers. And so it's really important. I always hear people say, well, if these were my kids, and I always say, well, they're not. And they are coming with differences. And I say that in such a loving way. I tell people, they're not my children, but they are my children, right? That's how I treat all the kids, in the sense, in the perspective of just with that love. But we can't come in with that mindset. And I do say to folks, we have to look at how we're looking at the children. And it's not blaming the parents. It's not, uh, part of my challenge is how we view the acting out child and their family. And again, that's nobody on this call, but helping our volunteers to see that children do have different circumstances. Families do have different circumstances and different needs. And if we are truly saying it's a mental health challenge that this child has, or mental health condition or difference, then that is what's happening. And to come alongside and support that family and support that child is really our goal, even as Sunday school teachers. When we think about the idea of mentorship, when we think about our ability, we can be that positive influence. I'm at the point now where the children love coming to church and they love seeing Pastor Stacey. And that's my goal with any family, with any child, to say this is a safe space. You are accepted, you are loved, and no child is the same. Um, when I think about acknowledging the differences, when I think about, even as I prepare my activities and my crafts, and I think about, oh, this person would like this when I'm ordering stuff, I start to really look at each of the different classrooms we have and our children that come. I gotta say, our regulars. But it really is important that we're starting to say, okay, not every child is going to want to do your sand activity. So, do you have something in place that's still just as related to the lesson, or again, helping that child to be successful on this day? Not seeing it as a refusal, but saying, you know what, this child is different and may not want to do this craft. I'll give you an example. I have a kiddo that has a hard time when we do things like sand craft because of how it feels. It's a sensory concern, not a refusal, not that they don't want to participate, but it really is hard for them. And so I do substitute and have a different activity when it's time for them to participate. This is a big one for me. Not all behavior is reportable. I am not a fan of a parent coming back from church to Sunday school to pick up their kiddo and the volunteers giving a laundry list of all the things they did wrong. I actually train my volunteers. They need to speak with me before speaking to the parent and making sure that we support and find ways to manage the behaviors before we report. Again, if it's a safety concern, if there's something, that we obviously have to address, we do want to address that, but I also want to be very careful, and making sure the parent feels welcome, that the child is welcome back. I personally, my sister, for example, my nephew is autistic, and my nephew has been put out of churches, which made it really hard for my sister and her family to even be able to go to churches, because they weren't able to manage my nephew or meet his needs in Sunday school. And so, from a personal perspective, I always say people, that's also been something that I've watched in my life, is my nephew, he's now in middle school, but from schools to churches to just community activities and events, it is really hard for a parent to pick up their kid and all they get is negative reports. And so even if it's just a moment, say, hey, you know what? Johnny was able to do our crafts today and he really gave great answers when it was time for story time.
Mhm.
That's what I really want them to hear when we pick them up and when we get an opportunity to pick them up. What would Jesus do? He'd love our babies. One of the things I always say, our heart has to be for our children and their differences and thinking about this is our new norm, right? The babies that are coming in. And so us being able to take that perspective and saying, how do we meet them where they are? How do we love them as they are? But then also, again, provide our volunteers with the support that they also need. Growth takes time. And even the idea of changing maybe your environment. Maybe there's things that you're thinking, you know what, Stacey, I need to look at sensory concerns in our environment. Maybe we do need to provide snack. Maybe we do need to think about how we transition and what do the changes look like. But helping your volunteers even to understand that, you know what, autistic kids, most about 50% of them are in general education classrooms. They are not nonverbal and non-speaking anymore, right? Many autistic folks are in gifted and talented by the time they get to high school. They're in the creative arts and they're doing plays and drama and they're participating in band and sports. And so changing even our understanding of what neurodivergent kiddos look like. I'll tell you, we've understood ADHD for a really long time now, even in educational settings, and yet we still have a hard time in educating our students with attention deficit issues. And so, again, it's going to take our volunteers time and they're going to be frustrated. I've had my volunteers vent to me and be like, whoo, these kids are hard. And I'm like, they are, but we're going to get through it. And then I come alongside and say, okay, how can I support you? What are the challenges you're having with this particular youth? And then let me know. And then how can I support you? And so that's also key too, is being okay to hear their concerns. There's our alarm letting me know we're almost done. Q&A time, but hearing their concerns and allowing your volunteers to be in that place to again know that it's okay to vent, know that it's okay to say I'm struggling with this. One of the things I've done is I serve and I try to serve with every volunteer with them in the real time with our students to make sure if there's anything that I see that they're needing help and support with, but then also giving them tips and strategies when our particular youth are in the room to kind of help them to manage and to get through the moments. And so I did want to stop. We have about 5 minutes for Q&A. If there's anything that folks have questions about, anything that you're saying, hey, I would love to kind of know a little bit more about, or how do you handle anything? I'd love to leave that 5 minutes for that.
I have a
No,
question.
oh, go ahead. I was going to
Yeah.
say, I know people put some stuff in the chat, so make sure that you get those questions answered, whoever posted those.
My question is, we have a lot of varying ability kids. We have a lot of autistic nonverbal actually,
Mhm.
and very, very probably on the spectrum difficult.
Yes.
So we do have things like fidget toys and a basket of things that we try to use for those kids, and especially in the elementary room, first through third grade. Then the
Mhm.
other kids want to play with those toys. The
Yep.
other kids that don't need the toys. So how any tips on how to handle that?
You let them.
Mhm.
So here's the thing, and I always say to folks, unfortunately, even in education classroom settings, right? That's when teachers will say, well, if one kid has the accommodation, the other kids will want them. I have the Legos out for everybody. I have the fidgets out for everybody. I have the bubbles out for everybody. So anything that I have in the space, unless the parent has brought it and it's their special, like,
Hmm.
toy or it's their special thing, that's the only thing that would be off limits because then again, that's going to escalate that child if someone else is playing with their thing. But I actually have enough in my rooms for everybody. What that also does, again, is it normalizes the play, right? It's not just special kids get the fidgets. It's all kids can play with the fidgets. And that's the mentality we want to have there as well. Um, and I think that's a great point because people sometimes feel, well, if I do it for one, I have to do it for all. And I do want to, Cindy, I'm going to answer this too also because I saw this in the chat. One of the things with neurodivergent kids, you always want to think about 3 years behind emotionally, socially, and developmentally. So the idea that this kid should be able to, no, my 5-year-old in my Sunday school is more like a 2-year-old in my Sunday school. And so I am always, if a kid can't assume that they, because again, I go back to the as if their disability is, then that's our lens. Kids can't meet the expectation. They can't meet the expectation right now. And that's okay. That's not, again, maybe I'm cutting for them every Sunday because they can't cut right now. Maybe I am tying their shoe every Sunday because this is a skill that even their parents are struggling with, right? And so when you think about some of the expectations, you're going to be about 3 to 4 years behind. And that's going to be really key for your volunteers to remember.
Uh, that is true, but I'm wondering, like, we have 24 kids usually
Mhm.
in the classroom. At the 11:45 service, we have three. We have a Down syndrome child who is he just tries to escape, so he's not a problem. He's a great kid. Um, and then we have two who almost need to be physically restrained so that they stay in the classroom.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking, as it is, it's a little bit hard with the stemming and stuff like that to keep the kids focused and be able to do a lesson. I, if all the kids were playing with toys, I don't know that there would be a lesson that would be able to be done.
Let me ask you this question. You have 24 in one room.
Hmm.
That's why your autistic kids are escaping. It's overwhelming. That is sensory overload and too much noise, probably, for those two kids to stay in that space. One of the things we have to remember is that autistic people are very visual
Hmm.
and sensory. And until you can control that sensory space of that, they're probably, again, the point, usually escape behavior is because the environment is too overwhelming.
We do take them out if we feel like they are too over. We take them out
Yeah.
and walk them in the lobby and do things like that. But
24 is a lot in a room for autistic kids to be able to stay. And I don't know how you guys, right? Again, we know we have the issues of volunteer. We just were able to separate because we had bigs and littles in the same space. And so, but I'm probably, if I were to say what's causing them to
yeah,
need to escape, it's probably sensory overload and too many bodies in that room. And we have the same issue in classrooms and schools. And this is why we put them in smaller classroom settings
right.
sometimes with 6 to 7 students, because 24 is just too much going on and too much. And you know what, Stephanie, I'm going to look it up. But there is a great video on YouTube and it's called, I think, At the Party. And it's like a video that shows like what autistic people perceive and what they feel and experience when they go into spaces. That is probably what may be happening for those two. I would also send you ask their parents how they're schooled, what the
I
schooling looks
have.
like. The classroom, is it a bigger classroom or a smaller classroom setting for school?
Um, for one of them, it's a smaller classroom setting, and
Yeah.
for the other one, he goes back and forth, honestly. But I'm one of the parents, I try to elicit suggestions. Now,
Yeah.
what do you do at home when,
Mhm.
XYZ? And
Yeah.
the mom was like, we just let him. And then the other question was, what do you do? What does the school do? When this is
Yeah.
happening
And
in
that's why I
school.
said school, not home, because home is a different environment, right? Your Sunday school is almost like school when we talk
Yeah.
about numbers. So I'm more curious because at home, right, they're going to let him because it's only him. In school, though, I'm curious because it's more like our Sunday school environment where you have other kids around. So
Well, I
it's,
asked.
does he use headphones? Do they take him for breaks? One of the things I forgot to mention, many of our kids will need their IEP accommodations even in Sunday school. So whatever's on their school plan, for example, to get through, they're going to need those same accommodations to get through on Sunday school. And I tell parents the same thing with homework, right? If your kid has an IEP, so for example, you can't do a 30-minute Bible lesson and think that kid's going to sit still. If even in school he has 10 minutes and needs a break, right? So even how we structure our activities, every 10 minutes, there's a movement change, right? Activities aren't lasting more than 10 minutes on
No,
Sundays.
we don't. The
Yeah.
the kids that are not neurodivergent can't even do 30 minutes.
Exactly, right. And that's because everybody's entertainment. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. Do we ask for an IEP? We don't ask for an IEP. However, what we can ask is there anything in school that helps your child to be successful in school that we could use here in Sunday school? That's how you ask that question without. Now, some parents will offer them an IEP. Listen, I have those parents because again, our goal is that connection piece, and we want to see their kids successful 100%. But I would do things like, for example, the number of people in the room. Start with sensory concerns. Absolutely say, what are those things that they're interested in? If they have a special interest, like I have a kiddo that likes the cars and he has a car in his hand an entire time he's in my Sunday school. And I don't care if he doesn't do the craft, as long as he's following along with me, we're good. And so those are those kind of things to say, what's more important? We are building skills of connection and belonging. And for many of our autistic children, that's going to go, if they can come every Sunday and just feel loved on and feel supported, eventually I'll get them there to do the activities. Eventually I'll get them, yes, taking in the form. And a lot of the forms are, it's interesting, and I love the forms for the special needs and intake information, but make sure you're also doing that forms again for everybody, right? Not just for our special needs. And I don't want parents to feel like, that we're singling out. If there's anything that you do for one, you do for all, right? So making sure, right, that they fill out the intake form, and on that intake form for kids that we say don't have different needs, then even on that intake form, it's still asking those same questions. How can we help your child to be successful? Is there any strategies that the school may use to help your child to be successful in Sunday school? Again, normalizing that experience for all of our families, not to single out anybody's important as well. I'm the kind of person, I talk to all the families, and then I also learn kids pretty quickly because that's been my space for 20 years. So I can usually tell if a kid's neurodivergent within about 5 minutes. And so I can adjust where again, I'm like teaching my volunteers, like, okay, well, this kiddo needs this. And then when you redirect this one, yes, he's going to say no, but you work through the no. And this is how you work through the no. Because that's a big thing too. When you ask a question, if you want to do something, they'll often say no. And so not asking the question, but saying, hey, this is what we're going to do next. This is our next activity, right? So even the idea that it's not a question, it's a direction. And so those are those kind of moments too, to kind of move people through and through those. So great questions. Stephanie, we're at 12:50. I don't know if we needed to.
Yeah, I just
Yep.
heard they're still chatting, so we're gonna
Okay.
keep going.
Okay.
When I like give a thumbs up, that means we need to go.
Yeah.
That
Yes,
way
yes,
I'm not
yes.
interrupting your conversation.
Absolutely.
So good. Those
Yeah.
questions were so great.
Anything else? They
You
are
circle back
great.
around to like
Yeah.
the fidget toys. We had those in our space. I mean, I'm thinking as you were talking, and it was like we had four pop-ups and pop-it things, and we had four
Yeah.
this, and then what it ended up becoming was yes, two of these kids on the rug need this,
Hmm.
but and then it was everybody wants it, and I thought, well, that's fine. But what ended up happening was they literally spent the 15-minute lesson fighting over because well, I want that one and I want that one. And so then I
Yeah.
thought, do I just offer one and they all are identical to eliminate that? Like there
Yeah.
was nobody listening. And I thought, well, this is worse. I'd rather have two that I can manage their struggle and have everyone else listening than literally trying to referee a toy fight.
And so one of the things I find that works probably better than the fidget is coloring. I give everybody a coloring page and a coloring tool, and while we're talking through the Bible, they're sitting there coloring or the craft. Fidget tools are great, but even when you said the poppets, right? That's why the school says no poppets, right? Because they are distracting and they're not the best. Natural, sometimes even teaching kids natural fidgets like rubber bands or bracelets, the strings on their sweatshirts. Sometimes there's natural fidgets that work a lot better than the fidgets themselves. But again, I agree with you. Like you could get to the moment where, right, everybody. So what I like to do is actually say things like, okay, we have about 5 minutes. We're going to put them up. Let's go to our craft. We move them to our craft activity. And then even at the end, my kiddos know that at the end, we'll have time to play. What really becomes the issue for a lot of autistic people is the sense of time and not knowing when I'll get to play. right? So I even set it up early to say, hey, at the end, remember, guys, if we get through all of this, we'll have 15 minutes at the end to play. And I always allow that time to play. We have like a kitchen set, we have, toys, we have Legos, we have all the things that they can play with even in our rooms. And so I really say, okay, let's get through this. All right, next thing, literally like a school teacher, how you have your calendar and you're talking them through the day to keep them on track. But then I also say, also remember, we're going to have our time to play at the end. So let's get through this. That helps me to keep them engaged through the lesson. But I would say try something that's more hands-on, even if it's like they're building with Legos while you're doing the lesson. Folks, just because they're not looking at you doesn't mean they're not listening. And that's the thing that we really have to get away from, right? Like I could be in a lecture for, professional development and I'm doodling while the person's talking. I've had people sitting next to me crocheting, right? Like, and they're listening, but they're doing things that help them get them through the day. So allowing that movement and being comfortable with that, not to where it's disruptive. I hear you 100% on the disruptive piece, but being able to manage that. And even saying, all right, everybody, let's pick your fidget. All right, everybody keep the same fidget for 5 minutes. Let me get through the story and then we can switch fidgets. Even making it fun and engaging is something that we can do when we see that becoming difficult with them kind of choosing the item that they're using. But yeah, and I'm not, if you haven't learned by now, I'm not a stickler on, at the ends of the day, what I find with most of my kiddos, right, is we're planting seeds. And we have like where we even send home the parent cues of the lessons. And so sending information home. But if it's worship, if it's, a kind thing that they can say to a friend, remember, we are planting seeds and building. And so, yes, they're getting nuggets every Sunday they come, but that's the goal that we want them there every Sunday. Right. And so, again, little by little, they're going to get that lesson. They're going to get the word of God in them. And so, I'm really, especially for my neurodivergent kiddos, the socialization piece is so important to me. It's so important because they don't get it in school. They get bullied, they get picked on. They have so, the challenges. And so if there's one place, and why can't Sunday morning church be that place, right? Where they get that connection, they get the socialization, they're able to be with us and feel safe. It's really, really important. So great question though about the fidgets. Yeah. And they love the green rug grass. I'm just saying, if you can get a nice sensory rug, listen, it's beautiful.
I think what we'll do is end our time, go back into the
Yep.
main session, because I know we like to end in prayer triads. If they're not back in the room, we can continue the conversation till they get back in. But thank you so much, Stacey. I have so many things, so many notes, and so many highlights of just things you said that were so helpful. One of the ones that I loved what you talked about was the kids crying and how it's not disruptive, but it's communication. I thought that was so valid, and so helpful to remember. But thank you so much for being with us. I wish we had another hour. But I appreciate your time with us. I hope you all take something away from this, and I'll make sure and send this out to everybody probably in the next couple days.